Okay, hello. Gandang tanghali sa inyo. Ito na naman pala si Lola Ray, no? Para sa isa na namang edisyon ng pagbabasa-basa natin ng mga batas, no? Itutuloy lang natin basahin yung tax code, yung National Internal Revenue Code, together with the train law. So, meron akong binuksan sa internet na yung about the National Internal Revenue Code. Tapos binuksan ko rin yung comparison of the NIRC and yung train law para mabasa natin yung mga binago sa National Internal Revenue Code ng train law. So, since nagtapos tayo kahapon sa 39, Section 39, no? Sisimula tayo ngayon sa Section 40. At yung may pagbabago ang train law mamaya pa sa Section 51. So, basahin na muna natin yung Section 40 ng National Internal Revenue Code. Section 40, Determination of Amount and Recognition of Gain or Loss. Letter A, yung computation of gain or loss. Sabi rito, the gain from sale or other disposition of property shall be the excess of the amount realized therefrom over the basis or adjusted basis for determining gain. Ano bang ibig niya sabihin doon? Yung excess o yung sobra sa amount na na-realize, sa amount na kinita ba ito? Yun ba ibig sabihin? Over the basis or adjusted basis for determining gain. And the loss shall be the excess of the basis or adjusted basis for determining loss over the amount realized. Okay. So, tandaan na lang natin yung formula. Sabi niya, computation ng gain. Sabi niya ganyan. Excess of the amount realized over the basis for determining gain. Yun. Yung loss naman ay yung excess of the basis or yung adjusted basis daw for determining loss over the amount realized. So, yun na lang ang ano. The amount realized from sale or other disposition of property shall be sum of money received plus the fair market value of the property. Okay. So, yun ang amount realized na sinasabi. Amount realized from sale plus the fair market value of the property. Teka, unawain ko lang ng konti. Medyo naguluhan ako. Sum of money received, idagdag mo yung fair market value. Yun yung amount realized divided by the adjusted basis for determining gain. Okay. So, para makuha natin yung excess of the amount realized, yun ang hindi ko makuha. Yun ang hindi ko maintindihan. Paano mo makukuha yung excess of the amount realized? Di ba? Ayan, sabi niya, amount realized ay yung money received plus the fair market value. Ano yung excess doon? Paano mo masasabi yung excess? Ano ba to? Money received less fair market value. Excess over the adjusted basis for determining gain. Ayan, medyo naguguluhan ako dyan. Hindi ko kayang ipaliwanag yan. Pero yun ang nakalagay sa batas. Siguro in time sa mga accountants dyan, no? Mas madali nyo maintindihan to. Basis for determining gain, sabi sa letter B, section 40. Basis for determining gain or loss from sale or disposition of property. The basis of property shall be, yung una daw, the cost thereof in the case of the property acquired on or after March 1, 1913. Okay, sabi niya ganyan. Basis for determining gain or loss from sale or disposition of property. Wag na yan. Property acquired on or after March 1, 1913. Okay. Ulitin natin. So, yung una, sinabi niya lang yung formula sa computation ng gain or loss. Ayon sa Section 40, no? Sa letter B, pinaliliwanag na yung basis for determining gain or loss from sale or disposition of property. So, sabi niya ganyan, kapag kayo property na acquire mo, Number 1, pag yung property na-acquire mo on March 1, 1913 or after, pag nabili mo siya sa purchase, pag nabili mo siya, yun ang basis, yung cost noon. Ikalawa, the fair market price or value as of the date of acquisition if the same was acquired by inheritance. Number 3, if the property was acquired by gift, the basis shall be the same as if it would be in the hands of the donor or the last preceding owner by whom it was not acquired by gift, sabi niya. Number 4, if the property was acquired for less than an adequate consideration in money or money's worth, the basis of such property is the amount paid by the transferee for the property. Yung amount paid. Okay. Number 5, the basis as defined in paragraph C5 of this section. If the property was acquired in a transaction where gain or loss is not recognized under paragraph C, number 2 of this section. Okay, so ang pinag-uusapan na lang dito ay yung yung uri ng gain at saka loss from sales or exchanges of capital assets, no? Yun yung tinutukoy ng section 14 na to, paano ma-determine. Tingnan naman natin dito sa letter C, section 40 pa rin, no? Exchange of property as a general rule, sabi niya, the entire amount of the gain or loss, as the case may be, shall be recognized sa exchange of property. Ang exception daw, no gain or loss shall be recognized if in pursuance of a plan of merger or consolidation, letter A corporation which is a party to a merger or consolidation exchanges property solely for stock in a corporation which is a party to the merger or consolidation. So, nakipag-exchange ka ng property mo kapalit ng stock para sa corporation, exception 'yan. Hindi mo kailangan tignan yung gain or loss. Hindi nire-recognize ng batas yung gain or loss mo doon. Letter B, a shareholder exchanges stock in a corporation for which is a party to the merger or consolidation solely for the stock of another corporation, also a party to the merger or consolidation. Or letter C, a security holder of a corporation which is a party to the merger or consolidation exchanges his securities in such corporation solely for stock or securities in such corporation, a party to the merger or consolidation. No gain or loss shall also be recognized if property is transferred to a corporation by a person in exchange for stock or unit of participation in such a corporation, of which as a result of such exchange, said person alone or together with others not exceeding 4 persons gains control of the corporation. Yan ang sabi niya. Number 3, section 40 pa rin, exchange not solely in kind, sabi niya. If in connection with an exchange described, sabi niya, an individual, a shareholder, a security holder, or a corporation receives not only stock or securities, permitted to be received without the recognition of gain or loss, but also money. So, nakatanggap din siya ng money, no? Nakatanggap siya ng stock or securities and money or property. The gain, if any, no, shall be recognized, but in an amount not in excess of the sum of the money and fair market value of such other property received. Yun yung sinabi niya. Sabi naman dito, letter B, if in connection with the exchange, dun sa kanilang exchange, no, palitan, the transferor corporation receives not only stock na pinapayagan na matanggap niya without the recognition of gain or loss, but also money. Ganun na naman, money or property, nakatanggap siya. Then, sabi, receiving such money or property distributes it in pursuance of the plan of the merger or consolidation. No gain to the corporation shall be recognized sa exchange. Kasi, dinistribute niya ito yung nakatanggap, dinistribute niya ito according to the plan of the merger. But if the corporation receiving such other property and money does not distribute it in pursuance of the plan of the merger, the gain, if any, but not the loss to the corporation shall be recognized. So, yung gain lang ang kikilalanin, but in an amount not in excess of the sum of such money and the fair market value of such other property so received, which is not distributed. Okay, yun ang sabi niya. Tignan naman natin yung assumption of liability, section 40 pa rin, ha. Sabi rito, If the taxpayer, in connection with the exchanges, dun sa mga nabanggit, no, nakatanggap siya ng gano'n na naman, stock, securities, tapos, and it were the sole consideration as part of the consideration. Another party to exchange assumes liability of the taxpayer or acquires from the taxpayer property subject to a liability. Di ba? Pag nakakuha ka ng property, may liability ka na dun. Then such assumption or acquisition shall not be treated as money and or property and shall not prevent the exchange from being within the exceptions, sabi. Okay, so yung taxpayer, ulitin natin. Taxpayer daw, naka-receive ng stocks or securities. Di ba? Yun yung consideration kung bakit siya nakipag-exchange ng kanyang property. That such assumption daw or acquisition shall not be treated as money. At hindi naman daw nun haharangan. Pahihintulutan niya naman daw yung exchange na yon from being within the exceptions. Naaayon siya dun sa exceptions na sinasabi. Sabi niya naman, number 4 pa rin to number 4 ng section 40. Sabi niya naman, if the amount of the liabilities assumed plus the amount of the liabilities to which the property is subject exceeded the total of the adjusted basis of the property transferred pursuant to such exchange, then such excess shall be considered as a gain from the sale or exchange of a capital asset or of property which is not a capital asset as the case may be. O, lumagpas siya, no? Doon sa total adjusted basis. Diba? Mas malaki na yung liability mo rito, diba? Sabi. Kasi sabi niya, if the amount of liabilities assumed, may mga bago kang liabilities, and the amount of liabilities to which the property is subject exceed the total of the adjusted basis of the property transferred pursuant to such exchange, yung sobra na yun shall be considered as a gain from the sale or exchange of a capital asset or of property which is not a capital asset as the case may be. Bakit? Liability nga, bakit mo itatrato na gain? Sabi niya, it shall be considered as a gain from the sale of the capital asset. O baka naman gain on the part of nung nagbenta. Di kaya, yun ang sinasabi niya. Kasi nagpakawala ka ng liability mo eh. So, yung liability na inassume nung binentahan mo na sumobra doon sa adjusted na sinasabi, yun ang gain mo. Hindi kaya ganun. Ibig sabihin, di pa ako sure doon. Binabasa ko lamang ang batas. At sinusubukan lang natin ipaliwanag, pero mahirap siya. Kaya kung meron kayong mga komento meron kayong idaragdag, sana po i-comment nyo sa baba, especially yung mga expert comments. Huwag naman sana yung mga panlalait na. Okay, number 5, basis. The basis of the stock or securities received by the transferor upon exchange specified, shall be the same as the basis of the property, stock, or securities exchanged, decreased by the money received. Okay, so ililess mo yung money na received, and the fair market value of the property received, and increased, plus, the amount treated as dividend of the shareholder, and the amount of any gain that was recognized on the exchange. So, parehas lang daw yung basihan ng the basis of stock or securities received. Parehas lang sila sa basis of the property, stock, or securities exchange, Decreased by money received, and the fair market value of the property received, and increased, the amount treated as dividend of the shareholder. Kasi nag-increase siya ng stocks, so magkakaroon ng increase to sa dividend ng shareholder. And the amount of any gain that was recognized on the exchange, provided that the property received as boot shall have as basis its fair market value, provided further that if as part of the consideration to the transferor, the transferee of property assumes a liability of the transferor or acquires from the latter property subject to a liability, such assumption or acquisition shall, for purposes of this paragraph, be treated as money received by the transferor on exchange. Provided finally that if the transferor receives several kinds of stocks or securities, di ba? Transferor, ito yung nagtatransfer ng property. Nakatanggap daw siya kapalit ng pag-transfer niya ng property ng mga stocks or securities. The commissioner is a BIR commissioner is hereby authorized to allocate the basis among the several classes of stocks or securities. The basis of the property transferred in the hands of the transferee, yung nakatanggap ng property, siya yung transferee, shall be the same as it would be in the hands of the transferor, increased by the amount of the gain recognized to the transferor on the transfer. So, yung basis daw ng property, hindi ko lang naiintindihan ko para saan itong mga basis na to sa section 40. Gain or loss. Siguro to magre-reflect kasi yung gain or loss doon sa iyong tax consequence, o di ba? Yung babayaran mong buwis, di ba? Yun na lang isipin natin. Di ba? Okay, mapunta na tayo number 6, section 40 pa rin. The term securities means bonds and debentures but not notes of whatever class or duration. So, ang securities ay yung mga bonds and debentures, no? Hindi raw kasali yung mga notes. The term merger or consolidation, when used in this section, shall be understood to mean una, the ordinary merger or consolidation, or the acquisition by one corporation of all or substantially all the properties of another corporation solely for stock, provided that for a transaction to be regarded as a merger or consolidation within the purview of this section, it must be undertaken for a bona fide business purpose and not solely for the purpose of escaping the burden of taxation. Provided further that in determining whether a bona fide business purpose exists, each and every step of the transaction shall be considered, and the whole transaction or series of transactions shall be treated as a single unit. Provided finally that in determining whether the property transferred constitutes a substantial portion of the property of the transfer, the term property shall be taken to include the cash assets of the transferor. Parang gustong suriin daw ng batas dito na yung merger or consolidation ay ginagawa para sa business purpose. So sabihin na lang natin sigurong in furtherance of profit, no? Gusto mong kumita rather than hindi mo ginagawa ang merger or consolidation para tumakas ka sa iyong tax obligation. So susuriin daw yung mga transactions na ginagawa and it will be treated as one. Kasi ginagawa mo yung mga series of transactions para ma-attain ang isang objective, which is supposedly kumita ka, 'di ba? Kumita yung corporation, not to escape yung mga tax obligations, sabi niya. The term control, sabi, when used in this section, shall mean ownership of stocks in a corporation possessing at least 51% of the total voting power of all class of stocks entitled to vote. 51% of the total voting power. Kumbaga 50 kalahati, plus 1. So ikaw na yung voting power, The Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, is hereby authorized to issue rules and regulations for the purpose substantially all and for the proper implementation of this section. Magtungo naman tayo sa section 41, yung inventories. Sabi niya, whenever in the judgment of the Commissioner, the use of inventories is necessary in order to determine clearly the income of any taxpayer, inventories shall be taken by such taxpayer upon such basis as the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, may by rules and regulations, prescribe as conforming as nearly as may be to the best accounting practice in the trade or business and as most clearly reflecting the income, sabi ang ganyan. So, yung mga ginagawa namang necessary recommendation, necessary rules, procedure, pina-formulate ni Secretary of Finance, nire-recommenda naman yung lagi ni BIR Commissioner. So, alinsunod doon kung paano ka paano dapat mag-conduct ng inventory. If a taxpayer, after having complied with the terms and conditions prescribed by the Commissioner, uses a particular method of valuing its inventory for any taxable year, then such method, sabi niya, shall be used in all subsequent taxable years unless a change to a different method is authorized. Pinayagan, subject to the approval yan ng commissioner ha. Meron ng ibang method. O di naman kaya, the commissioner finds that the nature of the stock on hand is such that inventory gains should be considered realized for tax purposes and therefore, it is necessary to modify the valuation method. Dahil sa scarcity, liquidity, marketability, and price movements, nasuri ng commissioner na, teka, palitan natin yung valuation method. Sabi niya, provided, however, that the commissioner shall not exercise his authority to require a change in inventory method often than once every 3 years. So, minsan lamang kada 3 taon niya pwedeng i-exercise ng commissioner yung kanyang authority na mag-prescribe, mag-require ng pagpapalit ng inventory method, and provided further that any change in an inventory valuation method must be subject to approval by the Secretary of Finance. Punta naman tayo sa Section 42, Income from Sources Within the Philippines. Sabi rito sa letter A ng Section 42, the following items of gross income shall be treated as gross income from sources within the Philippines. Una daw, yung mga interest derived from sources within the Philippines and interests on bonds, notes, or other interest-bearing obligation of residents, corporations, or otherwise. Yan. Ang treatment daw dyan ay gross income from within the Philippines. Ikalawa, dividends, di ba? The amount received as dividends from a domestic corporation and from a foreign corporation, unless less than 50% of the gross income of such foreign corporation for the 3-year period ending with the close of its taxable year preceding the declaration of such dividends, sabi niya rito, was the, or for such part of such period as the corporation has been. Ulitin natin na medyo nalito ako dun sa panulat niya eh. Meron siyang close parenthesis dito pero nawala yung okay, from a foreign corporation unless less than 50% of the gross income of such foreign corporation for the 3-year period ending with the close of its taxable year preceding the declaration of such dividends or for such part of such period as the corporation has been in existence was derived. Okay? Sabi niya, from a foreign corporation daw. Maliban na nga lang daw kung less than 50% of the gross income of such foreign corporation was derived from sources within the Philippines as determined under the provisions of this section, but only in an amount which bears the same ration to such dividends as the gross income of the corporation for such period derives from sources within the Philippines bears to its gross income from all sources. Okay, sa mga dividendong nakukuha daw sa foreign corporation, no? Sa mga na nakukuha nila, dividendong nakukuha sa foreign corporation within the Philippines. Yun, dividends from a domestic corporation and dividends from a foreign corporation within the Philippines. Services, number 3. Itatrato rin itong gross income from sources within the Philippines. Sabi rito, compensation for labor or personal services performed in the Philippines, no? Ika-4, rentals and royalties, no, from property located in the Philippines, no, or from any interest in such property, including rentals or royalties. Number 5, sale of real property, sabi. Gains, profits, and income from the sale of real property located in the Philippines. Number 6, na ituturing pa rin na gross income from sources within the Philippines ay yung sale of personal property. Gains, profits, and income from the sale of personal property as determined in subsection E of this section. Letter B naman tayo ng section 41. Section 42, letter B. Sabi niya, taxable income from sources within the Philippines. Sabi niya, in general rule, from the items of gross income specified in subsection A of this section, there shall be deducted the expenses, losses, and other deductions properly allocated thereto, and the rateable part of expenses, interest, losses, and other deductions effectively connected with the business or trade conducted exclusively within the Philippines, which cannot definitely be allocated to some items or class of gross income, provided that such items of deduction shall be allowed only if fully substantiated by all the information necessary for its calculation. The remainder, if any, shall be treated in full as taxable income from sources within the Philippines. Okay? Ano naman tayong exception sa taxable income from sources within the Philippines? Sabi dito, no deductions for interest paid or incurred abroad shall be allowed from the item of gross income specified in the subsection. So, hindi mo pwedeng ituring na gross income yung mga deductions for interest paid or incurred abroad, no? Unless indebtedness was actually incurred to provide funds for use in connection with the conduct or operation of trade or business in the Philippines. Basta may kinalaman siya in connection with the conduct or operation of trade in the Philippines. Pag wala, hindi siya kasali sa gross income, taxable income from sources within the Philippines. Ganun lang naman yun eh. Letter C, gross income from sources without the Philippines. Section 42 pa rin. Ito na may mga sources sa labas ng Pilipinas. Ano naman ito mga to? Number 1, interests other than those derived from sources within the Philippines as provided in paragraph 1 of subsection A ng section na ito. Ikalawa, dividends other than those derived from sources within the Philippines. Diba? Ikatatlo, compensation for labor or personal services performed sa labas ng bansa without the Philippines. Number 4, rentals of royalties from property located without the Philippines or from any interest in such property, including rentals or royalties for the use of or for the privilege of using without the Philippines, patents, copyrights, secret processes and formulas, goodwill, trademarks, trade brands, franchises, and other like properties. At ikalima naman, gains and profits and income from the sale of real property located without the Philippines. Ay ibig sabihin doon, outside the Philippines. Okay, letter D, section 42 pa rin, no? Taxable income from sources without the Philippines. Okay, from the items of gross income specified in subsection C of this section, there shall be deducted the expenses, losses, and other deductions properly apportioned or allocated thereto, and the ratable part of any expense, loss, or other deduction which cannot definitely be allocated to some items or classes of gross income. Okay. Sabi rito, no? Yun daw sa mga items of gross income, yung mga itinuturing na item of gross income na kasali sa subsection C, ide-deduct daw yung expenses, losses, and other deductions. Sabihin na lang natin allowable deductions. Kaya yun ang ibig sabihin ng taxable income lang eh, yung gross income specified in subsection C. Ito. Ano ba yung mga sinabi rito? Ayan, ano ba yung taxable income from sources without the Philippines? Paano mo kukumpitin? Yung mga nabanggit sa subsection C, items na yun, less the allowable deductions. Yun yung magiging halaga ng taxable income, di ba? The remainder, if any, shall be treated in full as taxable income from sources without the Philippines. Ganun din, pag within, di ba? Ano ba yung mga items na sinasabi sa batas na income from sources within the Philippines? Income or services, ganyan. O, ililess mo lang doon yung mga allowable deductions. Hanapin mo lang, ano yung mga allowable deductions? Yun yung taxable. Yun yung taxable income. Letter E, sabi niya rito, income from sources partly within and partly without. So, sabi rito, items of gross income, expenses, losses, and deductions other than those specified in subsections A and C shall be allocated or apportioned to sources within or without. O, kasi binabanggit doon yung mga taxable income within and without. Sabi niya, where items of gross income are separately allocated to sources within the Philippines, there shall be deducted, no, the expenses, losses, and other deductions properly apportioned or allocated thereto as a ratable part of other expenses, losses. Basta ang ibig sabihin dito, i-deduct mo yung allowable deductions doon sa itinuturing na bahagi ng gross income. Para bang, ano ba yung layman's term? Mas madali. Kunwari, kumita ako. Ito yung kita ko. Ano ba yung mga allowable deduction ko? Kunwari, inaalaw ng batas, ang batas ng expenses, necessary for ganyan. Business permits, kunwari. Ano yung pinapayagan ng batas? Ano yung naka-itemize sa pinapayagan ng batas? So, ito, gross nakita ko, niles ko yung lahat. Magkano yung amount na natira? Yun yung bubuwisan. Yun yung bubuwisan nila. Okay. Okay, magpunta naman tayo sa letter F. Definitions. Sabi rito, the words sale or sold include exchange or exchanged. Yun naman daw salitang produced includes created, fabricated, manufactured, extracted, processed, cured, or aged. Okay. Balikan natin ng konti itong income from sources partly within and partly without, sabi niya. In the case of gross income derived from sources partly within and partly without the Philippines, the taxable income may first be computed by deducting the expenses, losses, deductions apportioned or allocated thereto, and the ratable part of any expense, loss, or other deduction which cannot definitely be allocated to some items or classes of gross income. And the portion of such taxable income attributable to sources within the Philippines may be determined by processes or formulas of general apportionment prescribed by the Secretary of Finance. So, yun lang naman yan. Merong formula daw na pinaprescribe yung Secretary of Finance para ma-determine mo alin ba dito yung pwede nating i-determine as income within. So, taxable siya, alin sunod sa income within, and yung taxable income na from income without. Yun lang naman yung gusto niyang ipaiwatig. Chapter 8, Accounting Methods and Methods of Accounting. Ito, wala akong kamuhang-muhang talaga sa accounting. Kahit na nag-aaral ako ng college, nangungapya lang ako dito or hinuhula-hulaan ko lang. Pero subukan nating basahin ito ngayon. As a general rule, Section 3, the taxable income shall be computed upon the basis of the taxpayer's annual accounting period. Ito yung fiscal year or calendar year as the case may be. In accordance with the method of accounting regularly employed in keeping the books of such taxpayer. But if no such method of accounting has been so employed, or if the method employed does not clearly reflect the income, the computation shall be made in accordance with such method as, in the opinion of the commissioner, clearly reflects the income. If the taxpayer's annual accounting period is other than a fiscal year, or if the taxpayer has no annual accounting period, or does not keep books, or if the taxpayer is an individual, the taxable income shall be computed on the basis of the calendar year. Ganun daw ang general rule dito. Section 44, period in which items of gross income included. The amount of all items of gross income shall be included in the gross income for the taxable year in which received by the taxpayer unless other methods of accounting permitted under Section 43. Any such amounts are to be properly accounted for as of a different period. In the case of death of a taxpayer, namatay yung taxpayer, there shall be included in computing taxable income for the taxable period in which falls the date of his death, amounts accrued up to the date of his death, if not otherwise properly includable, in respect of such period or a prior period. Section 45, period for which deductions and credits taken. Sabi rito, deductions shall be taken for the taxable year in which paid or accrued or paid or incurred, dependent upon the method of accounting the basis of which the net income is computed, unless in order to clearly reflect the income, the deduction should be taken as of a different period. In the case of the death of a taxpayer, there shall be allowed as deductions for the taxable period in which falls the date of his death, amounts accrued up to the date of his death, if not otherwise properly allowable, in respect of such period or a prior period. Section 46, change of accounting period. If a taxpayer other than an individual changes his accounting period from fiscal year to calendar year, o kaya naman from calendar year to fiscal year, or from one fiscal year to another, the net income shall, with the approval of the Commissioner, be computed on the basis of such new accounting period subject to the provisions of Section 47. Ito yung pabago-bago ng paggamit ng accounting period. Ang tungo naman tayo sa Section 47, ito yung sinasabi niya. Final or adjustment returns for a period of less than 12 months. Ito yung susundin mo pagka pabago-bago siya ng paggamit ng period. Letter A, returns for short period resulting from change of accounting period. So, napaikli yung period niya kasi nagbago siya ng accounting period. If a taxpayer, sabi niya, other than an individual, with the approval of the Commissioner, changes the basis of computing net income from fiscal year to calendar year. A separate, sabi niya, separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the last fiscal year for which return was made and the following December 31. If the change is from calendar year to fiscal year, a separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the last calendar year for which return was made and the date is designated as the close of the fiscal year. Okay. Ulitin natin. Basahin muna natin buo. If the change is from one fiscal year to another fiscal year, a separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the former fiscal year and the date designated as the close of the new fiscal year. Ulitin natin. Sabi niya rito, ako hindi ko siya maintindihan ng ganun eh. So, yung taxpayer daw na bukod sa isang individual, okay, inaprobahan naman ng commissioner yung kanyang pagpapalit. So, nagpalit siya ng accounting period from fiscal year, napunta siya ng calendar year. Ang sabi rito, a separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the last fiscal year for which return was made and the following December 31. Meron daw separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the last fiscal year and the following December 31. Kasi fiscal to calendar siya eh. So, yung close ng fiscal year to the following December 31. Sabi naman dito sa letter B, income computed on basis of short period. Where a separate final or adjustment return is made under subsection A on account of a change in the accounting period, and in all other cases where a separate final or adjustment return is required or permitted by rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner to be made for a fractional part of a year, then the income shall be computed on the basis of the period for which separate final or adjustment return is made. Yan ang sinasabi niya. Magtungo naman tayo sa Section 48. Accounting for long-term contracts. Income from long-term contracts shall be reported for tax purposes in the manner as provided in this section. As used herein, the term long-term contracts means building, installation, or construction contracts covering a period in excess of 1 year. So kapag kayong kontrata mo ay mas mahaba sa 1 taon, yun ay long-term contracts. Persons whose gross income is derived in whole or in part from such contracts shall report such income upon the basis of percentage of completion. The return should be accompanied by a return certificate of architects or engineers showing the percentage of completion during the taxable year of the entire work performed under contract. There should be deducted from such gross income all expenditures made during the taxable year on account of the contract, account being taken of the material and supplies in hand at the beginning and end of the taxable period for use in connection with the work under the contract, but not yet so applied. If upon completion of a contract, it is found that the taxable net income arising thereunder has not been clearly reflected for any year or years, the Commissioner may permit or require an amended return. Okay, ganun pala siya, no? So, yung mga tao na yung basihan ng kanyang income ay yung mga kontratang mahahaba, no? Sabi, ire-report daw nila yung income na yun upon the basis of percentage of completion. Depende dun sa percentage ng completion. Yung return mo should be accompanied by a return certificate of architects or engineers showing the percentage of completion. Yung architect o inhinyere magsasabi kung ilang percent na yung proyekto. Kaya there should be deducted from such gross income all expenditures made during the taxable year. So, i-deduct yung mga allowable expense. Sabihin na natin yung mga supplies on hand, yung mga ganyan. Tapos, pag natapos na yung kontrata at nakita na yung taxable net income arising there under has not been clearly reflected for any years, yung BIR Commissioner papayagan niya magkaroon ng amendment yung iyong return. Amended return, no? Okay, Section 9, installment basis. Pag-usapan natin yung mga installment basis na yan, no? Letter A, sales of dealers in personal property. Under rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner, a person who regularly sells or otherwise disposes of personal property on the installment plan may return as income therefrom in any taxable year that proportion of the installment payments actually received in that year, which the gross profit realized or to be realized when payment is completed, bears to the total contract price. Sabi rito, yung isang tao na regularly, yun ang keyword, regularly sells. So, kunwari, dealer ka ng motor. Ganyan, nagpapahulog ka ng motor. Sabi ang ganyan. Ang sabi, may return as income therefrom in any taxable year that proportion of the installment payments actually received in that year. So, ano lang yung natanggap mong proportion payments in that year, yun lang ang magiging gross profit mo realized that year. Or to be realized. Pwede mo rin palang ilagay doon yung to be realized. Medyo naguluhan na ako doon. Sabihin na lang natin yung natanggap mo sa taon na yun na installment na bayad, yun na lang. Yun ang ilalagay mo. Yun ang basihan ng iyong gross profit. Letter B, sales of realty and casual sales of personality. Sabi rito, in the case of kunwari, casual sale or other casual disposition of personal property, no? Bukod raw ito sa property of a kind which would properly be included in the inventory of the taxpayer if on hand at the close of the taxable year. So, bukod doon, ha? So, in the case of a casual sale or other casual disposition of personal property for a price exceeding 1,000 pesos, o di naman kaya of a sale or other disposition of real property if in neither case the initial payments do not exceed 25% of the selling price, the income may, under the rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, be returned on the basis and in the manner above prescribed in this section. As used in this section, the term initial payments means the payments received in cash or property other than evidences of indebtedness of the purchaser during the taxable period in which the sale or other disposition is made. Okay. Letter C ng Section 49 pa rin, no? Sales of real property considered as capital assets by individuals. An individual who sells or disposes of real property considered as capital asset. Ito yung mga asset na hindi ginagamit sa negosyo, no? And is otherwise qualified to report the gain therefrom under subsection B may pay the capital gains tax in installments under rules and regulations to be promulgated by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Letter D, change from accrual to installment basis. From accrual to installment basis. If a taxpayer entitled to the benefits of subsection A elects for any taxable year to report his taxable income on the installment basis, di ba? Yun ang pinili niya, installment. Then, in computing his income for the year of change or any subsequent year, amounts actually received during any such year on account of sales or other dispositions of property made in any prior year shall not be excluded. Okay. Okay, so ibig lang sabihin nito, yun ang tatanggap mo lang based on installment doon sa taon na yun. Although hindi pa fully paid yung binibenta mo, yun ang i-declare mo. Yun lang ibig sabihin. Ay ng mga aso ko. Sandali lang ha. Sandali lang. Wait. Okay, pasensya na kayo at sobrang ingay ng aso eh. Nagwawala yung mga aso rito eh. Talagang ganun eh. Okay. Section 50, allocation of income and deductions. In the case of two or more organizations, trades, or businesses, whether or not incorporated and whether or not organized in the Philippines, owned or controlled directly or indirectly by the same interests, the commissioner is authorized to distribute a portion or allocate gross income or deductions between or among such organization, trade, or business if he determined that such distribution, apportionment, or allocation is necessary in order to prevent evasion of taxes or clearly to reflect the income of any such organization, trade, or business. Dahil may ngayong aso kanina, hindi ko naintindihan. Yung two or more organizations daw, trades or businesses, pag-aari or owned or controlled directly or indirectly by the same interests. The commissioner daw ay pinapayagan ng batas na ito to distribute a portion or allocate yung gross income or deductions between or among the organization. Iaata-atado niya yan. If he determined that such distribution or allocation is necessary in order to prevent evasion of taxes or clearly to reflect the income of any such organization, trade, or business. Para mas may pakita niya, kanino bang income to? Iaata-atado ko nga to. Yun lamang ang ibig sabihin ng Section 50. Okay. Magtungo na tayo sa Section 51. Merong pagbabago rito eh. Section 51. Dali lang ha. Haba na naman ito. 35 pa lang ako. Dali lang ha. Section 51. Hinahanap natin siya sa isa kasi merong pagbabagong ginawa yung train law doon. So, basahin natin. Section 51, yung tinatawag natin na individual return. Ayan ha. Letter A, requirements. Sabi dito, except as provided in paragraph 2 of this subsection, the following individuals are required to file an income tax return. Sino ba? Letter A, every Filipino citizen residing in the Philippines. Letter B, every Filipino citizen residing outside the Philippines on his income from sources within the Philippines. Nakatira siya sa labas, pero meron siya kunwaring kinikita rito sa Pinas. Letter C, every alien residing in the Philippines. Sila yung mga ET. Every alien residing in the Philippines on income derived from sources within the Philippines. And letter D, every non-resident alien engaged in trade or business or in the exercise of profession in the Philippines. Okay. Number 2, the following individuals shall not be required to file an income tax return. So, sino-sino sila? na hindi naman required. Letter A, an individual whose gross, whose taxable income, ito yung binago ng train law, does not exceed 250,000 pesos under Section 24A2. Okay, hindi ka lalagpas ng 250,000 pesos na kita sa isang taon, provided that a citizen of the Philippines and any alien individual engaged in business or practice of profession within the Philippines shall file an income tax return regardless of the amount of the gross income. So kahit na magkano pa yung income mo, kahit mas maliit pa sa 250,000, kung ikaw ay isang alien individual engaged in business or practice of the profession, magpa-file ka pa rin. Pero pag ikaw ay Filipino citizen na hindi lalagpas ng 250,000 ang kita mo sa isang taon, hindi mo daw kailangan mag-file. Sino pa hindi kailangan mag-file? An individual with respect to pure compensation income as defined in Section 32A1 derived from sources within the Philippines. The income tax on which has been correctly withheld under the provisions of Section 79 of this code, provided that an individual deriving compensation concurrently from two or more employers at any time during the taxable year shall file an income tax return. So yung mga with respect to pure compensation income, sabi hindi ka na kailangan mag-file, no? Letter C, an individual whose sole income has been subjected to final withholding tax. Kapag ka nag-final withholding tax ka na, no? Pursuant to Section 57A of this code. Letter D, a minimum wage earner as defined in Section 22 of this code, or an individual who is exempt from income tax pursuant to the provisions of this code and other laws, general or special. So yan Section 51, nasabi na natin yung mga nire-require mag-file ng return, yung mga hindi kailangan mag-file ng return. Ngayon naman puntahan naman natin yung wait lang. The foregoing, notwithstanding any individual not required to file an income tax return may nevertheless be required to file an information return pursuant to rules and regulations prescribed by Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Number 4, the income tax return shall be filed in duplicate by the following persons. Filed in duplicate. So, dalawang kopya. Letter A, a resident citizen on his income from all sources. Letter B, a non-resident citizen on his income derived from sources within the Philippines. Okay. Letter C, a resident alien on his income derived from sources within the Philippines. And letter D, a non-resident alien engaged in trade or business in the Philippines on his income derived from sources within the Philippines. Ang hirap dito, magnenegosyo ka, Pilipino ka, babayad ka ng kung ano-anong buwis, no? Ang dami. Meron kang IR, magbabayad ka ng BIR na buwis, national na taxation, magbabayad ka ng barangay permit, taxation din yata yun. Although ano naman yun, barangay permit or business permit, allowable deduction naman yata yun. Tapos bayad-bayad ka ng mga buwis. Tapos pagka kahit na wala kang pera, hihingi ka ng pera sa nanay mo, kakain ka sa Jollibee, mabayad ka VAT. At nalang buwis. Number 5, the income tax return o yung ITR shall consist of a maximum of 4 pages in paper form or electronic form and shall only contain the following information. Income tax return daw. Kailangan 4 pages na lamang siya. Yun ang sinabi rito sa train law. Ito, nadagdag ng train law. Ang dapat na nilalaman niya ay letter A, personal profile and information. Letter B, total gross sales, receipts or income from compensation for services rendered, conduct of trade or business, or the exercise of a profession, except income subject to final tax as provided under this code. So, linawin lang natin, pag yung income mo, yung kinikita mo, is subject to final tax. So, hindi ka na kailangan mag-file ng return. Letter C, allowable deductions under this code. Kailangan ilagay mo doon sa return mo. Letter D, taxable income as defined in Section 31 of this code. And letter E, income tax due and payable. So, syempre, nilagay mo lahat ng impormasyon mo. Ano ba yung, lagay mo lahat ng mga gross receipts mo. Yung mga tinanggap mo mga resibo na possibly mag-reflect ng kita mo. Ilalagay mo siyempre yung allowable deductions mo para makita ng BIR na i-deduct nila yon. Tapos, sila na magtatakda kung ano na ba yung taxable income mo. Letter B, where to file, sabi rito. The return shall be filed with an authorized agent bank. Pwede pala yun, no? Authorized agent bank, pwede mag-file doon. Revenue district officer, collection agent, or duly authorized treasurer of the city or municipality in which such person has his legal residence or principal place of business in the Philippines, or if there be no legal residence or place of business in the Philippines, with the office of the commissioner. When to file? The return of any individual specified above shall be filed on or before the 15th day of April. So bago daw mag-April 15 of each year, covering income for the preceding taxable year. Ikalawa, individual subject to tax on capital gains. O, tignan nga natin sino naman ito mga to. Letter A, from the sale or exchange of shares of stock not traded through a local stock exchange. Ayan, meron silang tax on capital gains kasi hindi naman daw traded. Nagbenta sila or exchange sila ng stock na hindi naman traded sa stock exchange. Kailangan daw nilang mag-file ng return within 30 days after each transaction and the final consolidation return on or before April 15. So, within 30 transaction, kailangan mo mag-file ng anong tawag doon? Consolidated ng kailangan mo mag-file after ng transaction, tapos mag-file ka ulit ng final consolidated return on or before April 15 of each year covering all stock transactions nung nagdaang taon. Letter B, from the sale or disposition of real property under Section 24D, shall file a return within 30 days following each sale or disposition. Tingnan natin si husband and wife. Married individuals, whether citizens, resident, or non-resident aliens who do not derive income purely for compensation shall file return for the taxable year to include the income of both spouses. But where it is impracticable for the spouses to file one return, each spouse may file a separate return of income, but the returns so filed shall be consolidated by the Bureau for purposes of verification for the taxable year. Letter E, return of parent to include income of children. The income of unmarried minors derived from property received from a living parent shall be included in the return of the parent, maliban na lamang or except when the donor's tax has been paid on such property. Nabayaran na yung donor's tax daw. And letter number 2, when the transfer of such property is exempt from donor's tax. So, hindi na kailangan isali sa return ng parents. Pagka ganun. Letter F, persons under disability. If the taxpayer is unable to make his own return, the return may be made by his duly authorized agent or representative or by the guardian or other person charged with the care of his person or property. The principal and his representative or guardian assuming the responsibility of making the return and incurring penalties provided for erroneous, false, or fraudulent returns. Letter G, signature presumed correct. Sabi the fact that an individual's name is signed to a filed return shall be prima facie evidence for all purposes that the return was actually signed by him. O, basahin natin yung dinagdag ng train law. Section 51A. Dinagdag niya yung substituted filing of income tax returns by employees receiving purely compensation income. Sabi niya, individual taxpayers receiving purely compensation income, regardless of amount, from only one employer in the Philippines for the calendar year. The income tax of which has been withheld correctly by the said employer, no? Tax due equals tax withheld. So, tama naman yung pagkakagawa ng employer. Shall not be required to file an annual income tax return. The certificate of withholding filed by the respective employers, duly stamped, received by the BIR, may stamp yun na may nakalagay na received by BIR, shall be tantamount to the substituted filing of income tax returns by said employees. Okay. Ito yung mga tumatanggap ng compensation income. Sandali nga, anuin nga natin, hanapin natin sandali para mas malinaw yung compensation. Medyo hindi ko naiintindihan masyado yung compensation income. Kayo ba naiintindihan nyo? Tignan lang natin yung compensation owners. Dali wait lang Ito. What is considered compensation? Give to an employee in exchange for the work they do for your business. Compensation is more than an employee's regular paid wages. It also includes many other types of wages and benefits. Types of compensation include base pay o yung hourly or salary wages. So, ang compensation na higit pa sa wage lang, no? Okay, so medyo naintindihan na natin kahit pa paano. Okay, yung section 52 ay medyo mahaba-haba, no? Magbe-break muna tayo. At babasahin natin section 52, yung corporation returns. May pagbabago dyan na ginawa ang train law. Okay, magtungo na tayo sa Section 52. Section 52 pa rin ng National Internal Revenue Code. Pero may kakibat na pagbabagong dinala ang train. So, basahin natin, no? Section 52 ay yung corporation returns. Letter A, yung requirements. Every corporation subject to the tax herein imposed, except foreign corporations not engaged in trade or business in the Philippines, shall render in duplicate a true and accurate quarterly income tax return and final or adjustment return in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 12 of this title. The income tax return shall, ito na yung dinagdag ng train law, consist of 4 o 4 na pages in paper form or electronic form, be filed by the President, Vice President, or other principal officer. Tapos shall be sworn to by such officer and by the treasurer or assistant treasurer, and shall only contain the following information. So ilalagay mo doon sa 4 pages mo. 4 pages pagkakasyahin mo in duplicate copy dito sa iyong quarterly income tax return. Okay? Kalagay yung number 1, corporate profile and information. Number 2, gross sales receipts or income from services rendered or conduct of trade or business except income subject to final taxes provided under this code. Number 3, allowable deductions under this code. Number 4, taxable income as defined in Section 31 of this code. And number 5, income tax due and payable. Provided that the foregoing provisions shall not affect the implementation of RA 10708. So yun ang kailangang nakasaad sa corporate returns at gagawin mo ito quarterly. So 4 na beses sa isang taon, no? O letter B, taxable year of corporation. A corporation may employ either calendar year or fiscal year as a basis for filing its annual income tax return, provided that the corporation shall not change the accounting period employed without prior approval from the Commissioner in accordance with the provisions of Section 47 of this code. Letter C, return of corporation contemplating dissolution or reorganization. Paano naman yung tax return ng isang korporasyon na pinag-iisipan na nila o patungo na sa dissolution or reorganization? Sabi rito, every corporation shall within 30 days after the adoption by the corporation of a resolution or plan for its dissolution or for the liquidation of the whole or any part of its capital stock, including a corporation which has been notified of possible involuntary dissolution by the Securities and Exchange Commission, or for its reorganization, render a correct return to the Commissioner, verified under oath, setting forth the terms of such resolution or plan, and such other information as the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, shall, by rules and regulations, prescribe. The dissolving or reorganizing corporation shall, prior to the issuance by the SEC of the Certificate of Dissolution or Reorganization, bago sila ma-issuehan ng Certificate of Dissolution or Reorganization, sabi nila, as may be defined by the rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, pwede silang mag-secure ng Certificate of Tax Clearance from the Bureau of Internal Revenue, which certificate shall be submitted to the SEC. So, papasa rin nila yun sa Securities and Exchange Commission. Okay, letter D, return on capital gains realized from sale of shares of stock not traded in the local stock exchange. Every corporation deriving capital gains from the sale or exchange of shares of stock not traded through a local stock exchange as prescribed under Sections 24C, 25A3, 27E2, 28A8C, and 28B5C shall file a return within 30 days after each transactions and a final consolidated return. Yan. Similar din sila sa individuals kanina, no? Shall file a return within 30 days din sila, and after each transactions in the final consolidated return of all transactions during the taxable year on or before the 15th day of the 4th month o yung April following the close of the taxable year. Section 56, ito may binago rito pero month lang yung binago. Sige, tingnan natin ha. Section 56, yung payment, sabi niya dito, and assessment of income tax for individuals and corporations. Okay. Wait lang, wait lang. Section 52, tinapos natin. Bago natin puntahan si 56, meron pang, tama ba? Okay, sige. Meron pa tayong 53, 54, 55, 56. O sige. 52, tapos na tayo. 53 muna. Daan naman tayo sa 52. 53, maikli lang. Sige. Basahin natin. Bago tayo magpunta sa 56, wait lang. Mali ako sa marking. Ayan. Okay, baka may ma-miss tayo eh. Kakatapos lang natin basahin yung section 52. 56 na ako kagad pupunta kasi doon yung may pagbabago ng konti. Daanan muna natin yung walang pagbabago. Section 53, extension of time to file returns. The Commissioner may, in meritorious cases, grant a reasonable extension of time for filing returns of income or final and adjustment returns in case of corporations subject to the provisions of Section 56 of this code. So mamaya puntahan natin yun. Section 54, returns of receivers, trustees in bankruptcy or assignees. In cases wherein receivers, trustees in bankruptcy, or assignees are operating the property or business of a corporation subject to the tax imposed by this title, such receivers, trustees, or assignees shall make returns of net income as and for such corporation in the same manner and form as such organization is herein before required to make returns. And any tax due on the income as returned by receivers, trustees, or assignees shall be assessed and collected in the same manner as if assessed directly against the organizations of whose businesses or properties they have custody or control. Section 55, the returns of general professional partnership. Ito yung masasabi natin dito, yung mga CPA na nag-form ng general professional partnership in the practice of their profession. Every general professional partnership shall file in duplicate a return of its income, exempt, ayan, maliban lang do sa income na exempted under Section 32B of this title, setting forth the items of gross income and of deductions allowed by this title and the names, taxpayer identification numbers, addresses, and shares of each of the partners. So magpunta naman tayo sa Section 56 kasi may pagbabago nga dito, no? Payment and assessment of income tax. Letter A, payment of tax. Sabi, in general, the total amount of tax imposed by this title shall be paid by the person subject thereto at the time the return is filed. Yun ang sabi niya. Okay. In the case of tramp vessels, the shipping agents and or the husbanding agents, and in their absence, the captains thereof are required to file the return herein provided and pay the tax due thereon before their departure. Upon failure of the said agents or captains to file the return and pay the tax, the Bureau of Customs is hereby authorized to hold the vessel and prevent its departure until proof of payment of the tax is presented or a sufficient bond is filed to answer for the tax due. Number 2, installment of payment. When the tax due is in excess of 2,000 pesos, the taxpayer other than a corporation may elect to pay the tax in 2 equal installments, in which case the first installment shall be paid at the time the return is filed, and the second installment on or before October. Dati July yan. Ngayon, ang ginawa ng train law, on or before October 15 following the close of the calendar year. If any installment is not paid on or before the date fixed for its payment, the whole amount of the tax unpaid becomes due and payable together with the delinquency penalties. Okay. Sabi pa rito, in case the taxpayer elects and is qualified to report the gain by installments under Section 49 of this code, the tax due from which installment payment shall be paid within 30 days from the receipt of such payments. Magandang tandaan yung within 30 days, no? Pero maganda kung pwede, agad-agarin mo, no? Bayaran mo agad, no? No registration of any document transferring real property shall be effected by the Register of Deeds unless the Commissioner or his duly authorized representative has certified that such transfer has been reported and the tax herein imposed, if any, has been paid. Okay, letter B. Assessment and payment of deficiency tax. So after the return is filed, the Commissioner shall examine it and assess the correct amount of the tax. The tax or deficiency income tax so discovered shall be paid upon notice and demand from the Commissioner. As used in this chapter, in respect of a tax imposed by this title, the term deficiency means, number 1, the amount by which the tax imposed by this title exceeds the amount shown as the tax by the taxpayer upon his return, but the amount so shown on the return shall be increased by the amounts previously assessed as a deficiency and decreased by the amount previously abated, credited, returned, or otherwise repaid in respect of such tax. Or number 2, if no amount is shown as the tax by the taxpayer upon this return, or if no return is made by the taxpayer, then the amount by which the tax exceeds the amounts previously assessed or collected without assessment as a deficiency. But such amounts previously assessed or collected without assessment shall first be decreased by the amounts previously abated, credited, returned, or otherwise repaid in respect of such tax. Okay, magtungo na tayo sa Section 57. May konting pagbabago rin na dinulot dito ang train law. Withholding of tax at source. Yan ang pamagat ng Section 57. Letter A, withholding of final tax on certain incomes. Subject to rules and regulations, the Secretary of Finance may promulgate, upon the recommendation of the Commissioner, requiring the filing of income tax return by certain income payees, the tax imposed or prescribed by Sections 24B1, 24B2, 24C, 24D, D1, 25A2, 25A3, 25B, 25C, 25D, 25E, 27D1, 27D2, basahin natin lahat, no? 27D3, 27D5, 28A4, 28A5, 28A7A, 28A7B, 28A7C, 28B1, 28B2, 28B3, 28B4, 28B5A, 28B5B, 28B5C, 33, and Section 282 of this code on specified items of income shall be withheld by payer corporation and or person and paid in the same manner and subject to the same conditions as provided in Section 58 of this code. Letter B, dito mayroong dinagdag, no? May dinagdag si train law. Withholding of creditable tax at source. The Secretary of Finance may, upon the recommendation of the Commissioner, require the withholding of a tax on the items of income payable to natural or juridical persons residing in the Philippines by payer, corporation, or persons as provided for by law at the rate of not less than 1%, but not more than 32% thereof, which shall be credited against the income tax liability of the taxpayer for the taxable year. Ito yung dinagdag ng train law. Provided that beginning January 1, 2019, the rate of withholding shall not be less than 1%, hindi siya bababa sa 1%, but not more than 15% of the income payment. Letter C, tax-free covenant bonds. In any case where bonds, mortgages, deeds of trust, or other similar obligations of domestic or resident foreign corporations contain a contract or provisions by which the obligor agrees to pay any portion of the tax imposed in this title upon the obligee, or to reimburse the obligee for any portion of the tax, or to pay the interest without deduction for any tax which the obligor may be required or permitted to pay thereon, or to retain therefrom under any law of the Philippines or any state or country, the obligor shall deduct bonds, mortgages, deeds of trusts, or other obligations, whether the interest or other payments are payable annually or at shorter or longer periods, and whether the bonds, securities, or obligations had been or will be issued or marketed, and the interest or other payment thereon paid within or without the Philippines, if the interest or other payment is payable to a non-resident alien or to a citizen or resident of the Philippines. Kasunod niya, Section 58, meron ding pagbabago rito. Merong pagbabagong ginawa si Pangulong Duterte. Section 58, returns and payment of taxes withheld at source. So letter A, quarterly returns and payments of taxes withheld. Sabi niya rito, taxes deducted and withheld under Section 57 by withholding agents shall be covered by a return and paid to, except in cases where the commissioner otherwise permits an authorized bank, pwedeng bayaran doon, revenue district officer, collection agent, or duly authorized treasurer of the city or municipality where the withholding agent has his legal residence or principal place of business, or where the withholding agent is a corporation where the principal office is located. The taxes deducted and withheld by the withholding agent shall be held as a special fund in trust for the government until paid to the collecting officers. So, ito naman yung mga binayaran doon sa mga withholding agent, no? Ang dinagdag ng train law, ito. May tinanggal siya, tapos ito yung nilagay niya. The return for final and creditable withholding taxes shall be filed and the payment made not later than the last day of the month following the close of the quarter during which the withholding was made. Letter B. Ano pa rin to 58. Statement of income payments made and taxes withheld. Every withholding agent daw required to deduct and withhold taxes under Section 57, shall furnish each recipient in respect to his or its receipts during the calendar quarter or year a written statement showing the income or other payments made by the withholding agent during such quarter or year and the amount of the tax deducted and withheld therefrom. Simultaneously, upon payment at the request of the payee, but not later than the 20th day following the close of the quarter in the case of corporate payee, or not later than March 1 of the following year in the case of individual payee, for creditable withholding taxes. For final withholding taxes, the statement should be given to the payee on or before January 31 of the succeeding year. Letter C, annual information return. Sabi rito, every withholding agent required to deduct and withhold taxes under Section 57 shall submit to the Commissioner, BIR to, kay BIR Commissioner, an annual information return containing the list of payees and income payments, amount of taxes withheld from each payee, and such other pertinent information as may be required by the Commissioner. In the case of final withholding taxes, the return shall be filed on or before January 31 of the succeeding year, and for creditable withholding taxes, not later than March 1 of the year following the year for which the annual report is being submitted. This return, if made and filed in accordance with the rules and regulations approved by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner shall be sufficient compliance with the requirements of Section 68 of this title in respect to the income payments. The Commissioner may, by rules and regulations, grant to any withholding agent a reasonable extension of time to furnish and submit the return required in this subsection. Letter D. Income of recipient. So, income upon which any creditable tax is required, sabi, to be withheld at source under Section 57 shall be included in the return of its recipient, but the excess of the amount of tax so withheld over the tax due on his return shall be refunded to him subject to the provisions of Section 204. Di pa natin nabasa yun. If the income tax collected at source is less than the tax due on his return, the difference shall be paid in accordance with the provisions of Section 56. All taxes withheld pursuant to the provisions of this code and its implementing rules and regulations are hereby considered trust funds and shall be maintained in a separate account and not commingled with any other funds of the withholding agent. Letter E, registration with Register of Deeds. Ito. No registration of any document transferring real property shall be effected by the Register of Deeds unless the Commissioner or his duly authorized representative has certified that such transfer has been reported and the capital gains or creditable withholding tax, if any, has been paid. Ayan, nabasa naman na natin yan kanina. Ngayon nga lang, mas inelaborate niya pa rito. Provided, however, that the information as may be required by rules and regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner shall be annotated by the Register of Deeds in the transfer certificate of title or condominium certificate of title. Provided further that in cases of transfer of property to a corporation pursuant to a merger, consolidation, or reorganization, and where the laws allow deferred recognition of income in accordance with Section 40, the information as may be required by rules and regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner shall be annotated by the RD or Register of Deeds at the back of the transfer certificate of title or condominium certificate of title of the real property involved, provided finally that any violation of this provision by the Register of Deeds shall be subject to the penalties imposed under Section 269 of this code. So, kailangan talaga mainam si RD. Kailangan maalam din siya. Okay, bago tayo magpunta sa Section 62. Section 62, wala na tinanggal So, ano tayo ngayon? 58. Balik tayo sa 59. 59 ng National Internal Revenue Code. Sana ito. Tax on profits collectible from owner or other persons. The tax imposed under this title upon gains, profits, and income not falling under the foregoing and not returned and paid by virtue of the foregoing or as otherwise provided by law shall be assessed by personal return under rules and regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. The intent and purpose of this title is that all gains, lahat ng kita, profits, and income of a taxable class as defined in this title shall be charged and assessed with the corresponding tax prescribed by this title, and said tax shall be paid by the owners of such gains, profits, and income or the proper person having the receipt, custody, control, or disposal of the same. For purposes of this title, ownership of such gains, profits, and income or liability to pay the tax shall be determined as of the year for which a return is required to be rendered. So, yung binasa natin kanina, yung medyo nalito-lito tayo, no? Itong buong title na to is about taxing yung kita mo. Tinatax niya yung kita mo. Yun lang yung essence niya. Dapat i-determine natin ano ba yung mga kinikita mo, dapat ba itong buwisan, magkanong buwis ang dapat ipataw dito, alinsunod sa batas. Yun basically, yun lang naman yung sinasabi niya. Okay, magtungo tayo sa chapter 10. Okay. Estates and trusts. Okay? Section 60, imposition of tax. Letter A, application of tax. The tax imposed by this title upon individuals shall apply to the income of estates or of any kind of property held in trust, including, ito, kita ng mga, kunwari, lote, held in trust. Number 1, income accumulated in trust for the benefit of unborn or unascertain person or persons with contingent interests, and income accumulated or held for future distribution under the terms of the will or trust. Ikalawa, palit muna tayong pwesto. Income which is to be distributed currently by the fiduciary to the beneficiaries, and income collected by a guardian of an infant which is to be held or distributed as the court may direct. Number 3, income received by estates of deceased persons during the period of administration or settlement of the estate. And ika-4, number 4, income which is the discretion of the fiduciary may be either distributed to the beneficiaries or accumulated. So lahat ng income na nabanggit na yan, bubuhisan. Yun lang naman yung ibig niyang sabihin. Letter B, exception. The tax imposed by this title shall not apply to employees' trust, which forms part of a pension, stock bonus, or profit-sharing plan of an employer for the benefit of some or all of his employees. Number 1, if contributions are made to the trust by such employer or employees or both for the purpose of distributing to such employees the earnings and principal of the fund accumulated by the trust in accordance with such plan. Number 2, if under the trust instrument it is possible at any time prior to the satisfaction of all liabilities with respect to employees under the trust for any part of the corpus or income to be, within the taxable year or thereafter, used for or diverted to purposes other than for the exclusive benefit of his employees, provided that any amount actually distributed to any employee or distributee shall be taxable to him in the year in which so distributed to the extent that it exceeds the amount contributed by such employee or distributee. So kung nag-exceed raw, lumagpas yung kanyang ang tawag dito, yun, meron siyang pinamahagi sa kanyang mga employee pero lumagpas sa contribution, mas mataas dun sa contribution ng mga employees na yun ay parang deducted para sa kanya, deducted dun sa employer. Letter C, computation and payment. Number 1, in general, the tax shall be computed upon the taxable income of the estate or trust and shall be paid by the fiduciary except provided in Section 63. May kinalaman ito sa revocable trust. So, as a general rule daw, yung buwis ay babayaran, buwis ng income ng estate or trust ay babayaran ng fiduciary. Maliban na nga lang daw sa Section 63, may kinalaman sa revocable trusts, and Section 64 na may kinalaman sa income for the benefit of the grantor. Number 2 ng Section 60, consolidation of income of 2 or more trusts. Where in the case of 2 or more trusts, the creator of the trust in each instance is the same person and the beneficiary in each instance is the same, the taxable income of all trusts shall be consolidated and the tax provided in this section computed on such consolidated income, and such proportion of said tax shall be assessed and collected from each trustee which the taxable income of the trust administered by him bears to the consolidated income of the several trusts. So, yung creator daw ng trust, kung marami siyang trust, di ba? Tapos, same person lang yung creator niya. At yung beneficiary niya ay the same. Iko-consolidate daw yun. Okay, magtungo tayo sa Section 61. Okay? Saan na ako? Ayan. Section 61, taxable income. The taxable income of the estate or trust shall be computed in the same manner and on the same basis as in the case of an individual, except letter A, except that there shall be allowed as a deduction in computing the taxable income of the estate or trust the amount of the income of the estate or trust for the taxable year, which is to be distributed currently by the fiduciary to the beneficiaries. So, deduction yun, allowed na deduction yun. And the amount of the income collected by a guardian of an infant which is to be held or distributed as the court may direct, but the amount so allowed as a deduction shall be included in computing the taxable income of the beneficiaries, whether distributed to them or not. So, any amount allowed as deduction under this subsection shall not be allowed as a deduction under subsection B. Yung susunod nating babasahin. So, pag inallow na nitong section na ito na i-deduct, hindi na pwede ritong, hindi naman pwedeng paulit-ulit na deduction, di ba? O, dito na tayo sa, sa letter B. Section 61 pa rin. In the case of income received by estates of deceased persons during the period of administration or settlement of the estate, in the case of income which, in the discretion of the fiduciary, may be either distributed to the beneficiary or accumulated, there shall be allowed as an additional deduction in computing the taxable income of the estate or trust the amount of the income of the estate or trust for its taxable year, which is properly paid or credited during such year to any legatee, heir, or beneficiary, but the amount so allowed as a deduction shall be included in computing the taxable income of the legatee, heir, or beneficiary. Okay? Letter C, ng section 61 pa rin. In the case of a trust administered in a foreign country, the deductions mentioned, sabi, in subsections A and B, yung kakabasa lang natin of this section shall not be allowed. Kasi nasa foreign country yung trust na yun eh. Provided that the amount of any income included in the return of said trust shall not be included in computing the income of the beneficiaries. Section 62 naman ay tinanggal na sa train law. Okay, so magbabalik tayo sa section 63. Papahinga lang ako ng konti ha. Tignan natin kung hanggang saan pa tayo aabot magbasa-basa, no? Gandang libangan din to, no? Magbasa-basa kahit mahirap intindihin, no? Baka sakali mayroong makaintindi, turuan tayo, i-share dyan, di ba? Wait lang. Okay. Grabe, no? 2 oras na rin pala tayo nagbabasa-basa, no? Hirap magbasa-basa, no? Subukan na rin natin magbasa pa ng konti, no? Section 63 ng National Internal Revenue Code pa rin. Between Section 63 to 73, wala pa naman pagbabago ang train dyan. So, basahin muna natin, no? Section 63, Revocable Trusts. Teka, buksan ko lang yung fan. Revocable trusts, where at any time the power to revest in the grantor title to any part of the corpus of the trust is vested, number 1, in the grantor either alone or in conjunction with any person not having substantial adverse interest in disposition of such part of the corpus or the income therefrom, or number 2, in any person not having a substantial adverse interest in the disposition of such part of the corpus or the income therefrom. The income of such part of the trust shall be included in computing the taxable income of the grantor, sabi niya. Basta income eh. Basta yung income, bubuwisan eh. Ganun lang naman yung sinasabi-sabi nila dito. Section 64. Income for benefit of grantor. Letter A, where any part of the income of a trust is or in the discretion of the grantor or of any person not having a substantial adverse interest in the disposition of such part of the income may be held or accumulated for future distribution to the grantor, o hindi naman daw kaya yung part ng trust na yon. May or in the discretion of the grantor or of any person not having a substantial adverse interest in the disposition of such part of the income be distributed to the grantor, o di naman daw kaya is any part of the income of a trust is or in the discretion of the grantor or of any person not having a substantial adverse interest in the disposition of such part of the income may be applied to the payment of premiums upon policies of insurance on the life of the grantor. Such part of the income of the trust shall be included in computing the taxable income of the grantor. Letter B. As used in this section, the term in the discretion of the grantor means the discretion of the grantor, either alone or in conjunction with any person not having substantial adverse interest in the disposition of the part of the income in question. Yun. Ibig sabihin yun, yung sariling discretion o sariling disposal, tama ba ang term? At the instance of the grantor. Yan. Okay. Yung pinag-usapan kasi natin doon yung income na for the benefit ng grantor. Section 65, fiduciary returns. Sabi niya, guardians, trustees, executors, administrators, receivers, conservators. Sabi niya, and all persons or corporations acting in any fiduciary capacity shall render in duplicate a return of the income of the person, trust, or estate for whom or which they act, and be subject to all the provisions of this title which apply to individuals in case such person, estate, or trust has a gross income of 20,000 pesos or over during the taxable year. Such fiduciary or person filing the return for him or it shall take oath that he has sufficient knowledge of the affairs of such person, trust, or estate to enable him to make such return, and that the same is, to the best of his knowledge and belief, true and correct, and be subject to all the provisions of this title which apply to individuals, provided that a return made by or for one or two or more joint fiduciaries filed in the province where such fiduciaries reside under such rules and regulations as the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, shall prescribe, shall be a sufficient compliance with the requirements of this section. Section 66. Fiduciaries indemnified against claims for taxes paid. So, na-indemnify itong mga fiduciaries. Trustees, executors, administrators, and other fiduciaries are indemnified against the claims or demands of every beneficiary for all payments of taxes which they shall be required to make under the provisions of this title, and they shall have credit for the amount of such payments against the beneficiary or principal in any accounting which they make as such trustees or other fiduciaries. So, hindi maaaring mag-claim yung mga beneficiaries, yung mga makikinabang doon sa trust o yung mga property in trust, di ba? O nasa pangangalaga ng administrator. Hindi naman na sila ang ma-obliga na magbayad naman ng mga buwis, kundi yung subject of the trust naman. Yun naman ang ibig sabihin dito. Magtungo tayo, kaya pa ba nating basahin to? Sige, subukan nating basahin to, madami-dami pa. Okay, chapter, na tayo? Chapter 11, no? Other income tax requirements. Okay. Section 67, collection of foreign payments. Sabi niya rito, all persons, corporations duly registered, general co-partnerships, itong compañías colectivas, general co-partnerships, undertaking for profit or otherwise the collection of foreign payments of interests or dividends by means of coupons, checks, or bills of exchange shall obtain a license from the commissioner. Kukuha siya ng lisensya sa BIR commissioner and shall be subject to such rules and regulations enabling the government to obtain the information required under this title as the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, shall prescribe. Section 68, information at source as to income payments. Sasabi dito, all persons, corporations, or duly registered co-partnerships o yung tinatawag ng compañías colectivas in whatever capacity, acting including lessees or mortgagors of real or personal property, trustees acting in any trust capacity, yung mga executors, administrators, receivers, conservators, and employees making payment to another person, corporation, or duly registered general co-partnership. Magbabayad sila ng interests, rents, salaries, wages, premiums, annuities, compensations, remunerations, emoluments, or other fixed or determinable gains, profits, and income maliban sa payment na sinasabi sa Section 69. Okay, in any taxable year or in the case of such payments made by the government of the Philippines. Sabi, the officers or employees of the government having information as to such payments and required to make returns in regard thereto are authorized and required to render a true and accurate return to the Commissioner under such rules and regulations and in such form and manner as may be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner, setting forth the amount of such gains and profits and income, no? And yung name and address of the recipient of such payments. Gusto nila malaman, kailangan nasa pangangalaga nila kung sino ba yung mga binayaran at magkano ba yung binayad. Dapat nakalagay daw yun sa return. Such returns shall be required in the case of payments of interest upon bonds or mortgages or deeds of trust or other similar obligations of corporations, and in the case of collections of items not payable in the Philippines, of interest upon the bonds of foreign countries and interest from the bonds and dividends from the stock of foreign corporations by persons, corporations, or duly registered general co-partnerships undertaking as a matter of business or for profit or otherwise the collection of foreign payments of such interests or dividends by means of coupons or bills of exchange. Section 69, return of information of brokers. Mga broker naman, no? Every person, corporation, or duly registered general co-partnership o yung tinatawag na kompanya kolektiba doing business as a broker in an exchange of board or other similar place of business shall, sabi nila, they shall render kapag ni-require ng commissioner a correct return duly verified under oath under such rules and regulations na sinabi ng finance secretary in accordance with the recommendation ng commissioner. Showing the names, dapat nakalagay dun sa kanilang return yung names of customers from whom such person, corporation, or duly registered general co-partnership has transacted any business. Sino ba yung mga kanegosyo mo? Kasama doon yung mga details as to profits, losses, or other information which the commissioner may require, sabi nila. Ang tungo tayo Section 70, sabi rito, returns of foreign corporations. Letter A, requirements, sabi rito, upon the rules prescribed by the Secretary of Finance. Sabi, any attorney, accountant, fiduciary, bank, trust company, financial institution, or other person who aids, assists, counsels, or advises in, or with respect to, the formation, organization, or reorganization of any foreign corporation shall, within 30 days thereafter, file with the Commission a return. Okay, so yung mga may kinalaman pala dito sa pag-uorganisa ng mga foreign corporation dito, ay obligado silang mag-file ng return. Letter B, ano ba yung form and contents ng return para dito sa foreign corporations na ito? It shall be in such form and shall set forth under oath in respect of which such corporation to the full extent of the information within the possession or knowledge or under the control of the person required to file the return, such information as the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner shall prescribe. So yung mga sasabihin nila doon, yun ang ilalagay, sasabihin ni Secretary of Finance and subject to the recommendation of the Commissioner, yun ang ilalagay mo sa form and contents ng isang return ng foreign corporations. Usually, pag foreign corporation, sa ano naman yan sa Manila. So, usually, doon sila, kumbaga, punta ka na lang sa BIR, parang gano'n. Kaya, research mo, kontakin mo sila, parang gano'n yung sinasabi ng batas na yun, ang provision na ito. Section 71, Disposition of Income Tax Returns, Publication of Lists of Taxpayers and Filers. So after the assessment shall have been made, as provided in this title, the returns, together with any corrections thereof, which may have been made by the Commissioner, shall be filed in the office of the Commissioner and shall constitute public records. Uy, si Mom's Ren's Kitchen, napadaan lang po. Ay, thank you, madam, sa pagdaan. Okay. So, yun ang sabi niya. It shall be filed in the office of the Commissioner and shall constitute public records and be open to inspection as such upon the order of the President of the Philippines under rules and regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, again, upon recommendation of the Commissioner. So, si Commissioner daw may in each year cause to be prepared and published in any newspaper the lists containing the names and addresses of persons who have filed income tax returns. Yun ang sinasabi sa Section 71. So, nais nating batiin si Mom's Ren's Kitchen. Sabi niya, napadaan lang po. No? Hello ulit sa'yo. Nakatutuwa ako dito Medyo dumadaan-daan siya. Paminsan-minsan. Maraming salamat. Nagbabasa-basa lamang po ako ng batas. Tapos, magtungo tayo sa Section 72. Suit to recover tax based on false or fraudulent returns. Okay, sabi rito, when an assessment is made in case of any list, statement, or return which in the opinion of the Commissioner was false or fraudulent, sabi niya, no tax collected under such assessment shall be recovered by any suit unless it is proved that the said list was not false nor fraudulent and did not contain any understatement or undervaluation. Okay, so kailangan muna papatunayan mo pag nakita ni Commissioner na parang fraudulent yung returns mo. Wala raw kahit na ano pang pagsasampang kaso ang pwedeng payagan para mabawi mo yung binayad mo doon. Unless napatunayan mo na yung iyong return ay hindi fraudulent o hindi siya undervaluated. Section 73, Distribution of Dividends or Assets by Corporations, no? Okay, letter A. Okay. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng dividends? The term dividends, when used in this title, means any distribution made by a corporation to its shareholders out of its earnings or profits and payable to its shareholders, whether in money or in other property. Where a corporation distributes all of its assets in complete liquidation or dissolution, the gain realized or loss sustained by the stockholder, whether individual or corporate, is a taxable income or a deductible loss as the case may be. So yun yan. Ang dividendo ay yung dinidistribute sa mga shareholders out of the earnings, no? Dahil ito ay payable sa shareholders whether in money or property. Letter B, stock dividend. A stock dividend representing the transfer of surplus to capital accounts shall not be subject to tax. Okay, yung ano mo yun, transfer ng kita mo yun yung sobrang kita, tinatransfer mo sa yung capital account, yun daw yung stock dividend at hindi raw yung subject ng pagbubuwis. However, if a corporation cancels or redeems stock issued as a dividend at such time and in such manner as to make the distribution and cancellation or redemption in whole or in part essentially equivalent to the distribution of a taxable dividend, the amount so distributed in redemption or cancellation of the stock shall be considered as taxable income to the extent that it represents a distribution of earnings or profits. Letter C, dividends distributed are deemed made from most recently accumulated profits. So any distribution made to the shareholders or members of a corporation shall be deemed to have been made from the most shall be deemed to have made from, dapat ito eh, mali na kasulat, from the most recently accumulated profits or surplus, doon siya kinuha, and shall constitute a part of the annual income of the distributee for the year in which received. Letter D, net income of a partnership deemed constructively received by partners. The taxable income declared by a partnership for a taxable year, which is subject to tax under Section 27A of this code, after deducting the corporate income tax imposed therein, shall be deemed to have been actually or constructively received by the partners in the same taxable year and shall be taxed to them in their individual capacity, whether actually distributed or not. Okay? Okay, so doon na muna tayo magtatapos, no? Next na babalikan nating babasahin itong chapter 12 na. Okay? So nagtapos tayo sa section 73 ng National Internal Revenue Code. Mag-pray na muna tayo. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So sana samahan niyo ako ulit next time sa ating pagbabasa. At ay, nako, ang hirap ipaliwanag nito in layman's term. So God bless.